lengthy article, so I've concised as much as possible. So I had to skip out on a lot of the pathologies. Uh, so okay, so here's my moderator, Dr. Anshul Sharma. He's a consultant and HOD Department of Pain Medicine, BLK Max Hospital. And so, ma'am, I would like to take your permission because I've added a few MRIs which are not a part of the article to make it more understanding. So, can I proceed? Ma'am, you're please unmute, ma'am.
Yes, she has very beautifully added some MRI pictures because the paper we are going to discuss is, very, very just theoretical based that, what are the various disc pathologies, what are the various misnomers we use. So she has also added MRI pictures to explain the same pathology, like what picture we would expect on MRI. So that is not a part of this, but, as you all know, we put this recording on our YouTube channel, so you all will be able to see it later as well. So you may start, Dr. Sajanya. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this is an article, it's a review article taken from one second, one second, madam. Right. Okay, this is a review article. Ma'am, how can I minimize the thumbnails here? Yeah. So this is a review article taken from the lumbar disc nomenclature. It's version 2.0. Recommendations from the combined task forces of the North American Spine Society, the American Society of Spine Radiology, and the American Society of Neuroradiology. So earlier there were many terms, a lot of nomenclature describing the pathologies of the spine and the disc. But then because there were many deficiencies in this, so the NSS, which is a multidisciplinary task force, has come up with a certain nomenclature which is universal, and this helps not only in communication among the doctors, but it also helps in planning the management as well. So we shall move ahead. So what is a normal disc? A normal disc is something, it's composed of the nucleus pulposus, the inner nucleus pulposus, and an outer annular fibrosis. The nucleus pulposus is a jelly-like substance, and it's got type 2 collagen fibers and proteoglycans, a lot of proteoglycans to it, which is the hydrating substance, which makes it hydrating a jelly-like substance with annular fibers, with the outer annulus fibrosis, which has got a lamellated, which is basically lamellated structure with type 1 collagen fibers to it and proteoglycans to it. So the lamellated structure is of importance because, so this exactly how it is when we, if we can lock the fingers of both our hands and we get a structure. So that's how the lamellated structure of the annulus fibrosis is. This not only uh, 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 makes the pressure around the circumference equal, but it also prevents the disc from getting displaced out. Okay, so a normal disc is one which is fully and normally developed disc with no changes attributable to any trauma, disease, or degeneration. So this is the nucleus pulposus with the annulus fibrosis to it. So this is how we see a normal disc on the MRI. Here being a hydrated nucleus pulposus with the hypo-intense structure. And here is, a hyper-intense structure and a hypo-intense nucleus fibrosis to it, the annulus fibrosis to it. And here are the end plates, which are also a part of the disc segment. So what is a nucleus of origin? A nucleus of origin is this central part of the nucleus, or the central part of the disc, or the nuclear portion of the disc, which usually is referred from where the disc gets displaced. So this is that part of the disc from where the disc originates and it gets displaced out. So that is the nucleus of origin. And we've already discussed the annulus fibrosis. It's a multi-laminated fibrous tissue. It forms the periphery of each disc, and it attaches cranially and caudally to the end plates. here it gets attached to the end plates above and below with a small apophyseal bone, a ring-like structure called the apophyseal bone, which is important because any fractures to this apophyseal bone leads to detachment of the annulus fibrosus from the end plates, and it leads to degeneration. So what is a disc level? So disc level is is the level of the disc and the vertebral canal between the two axial planes through the bony end plates of the vertebra, which is above and below the cranial and caudate to the disc being described. So why this is important? Because mainly all our interventions because depends upon the because before we perform any intervention, it is important to know at what disc level we are performing it, and this becomes more important when there are certain congenital deformities to it, when there is a transition of the vertebra, like say there is lumbarization or there is sacralization, where this, yeah, uh, yeah. So this is called lumbarization. So there is a entity called lumbarization where the sacral vertebra, the S1 vertebra, the sacral vertebra, which is to be ideally be fused with the sacrum, um, uh, displaces itself, or it is shown to be as one of the lumbar vertebra. So instead of we having five lumbar vertebra, we see another lumbar vertebra, the sixth lumbar vertebra. That is how it looks like. So in case like now so how do we know what disc level we are at? So before we move with any before we go for any intervention, we need to know at what level the pathology lies. So this can be identified by different techniques. One, if we happen to have an entire MRI of the whole spine, then we can count it from above C2 level, we can count downwards. But in case we do not have, and then we got to perform any intervention, so the easiest way is, yeah, one more way is where if we have an X-ray, then we can count from the last rib, this being the last rib, the T12. From here, we can keep counting downwards. So we know at what level the pathology lies. But then in case we do not, yeah, in case we do not know that, okay, so then how do we do it? So whatever pathological disc is there, or we see on the MRI, like say example, if here we have an L4, L5, we can find we can see an annular fissure here. So we know the intervention that we're going to perform is on this particular disc, but we do not know now whether there's any lumbarization or sacralization. So what we can do is, now we know the last but one disc on the MRI is the pathological disc, or the disc where we need to do the intervention upon. So on the fluoroscopy, we see what is the last disc, and the one above that is the disc where intervention has to be performed. So this way, even when there is any transition of the vertebra, like say like lumbarization or sacralization, we do not miss out on the pathological disc, and we do not perform the intervention on the wrong disc, because on the fluoroscopy we do not see the disc per se. So that's the importance of knowing the disc level. So here we see lumbarization of the S1 vertebrae, where instead of being fused with the sacrum, it is being shown as an additional vertebrae. Okay. So then we move on to sacralization of the vertebrae, where here instead of the L5 being looking like a lumbar vertebrae, it is looking like a sacral vertebra. Okay, it's taking the place of the S1 vertebrae. This sacralization is important mainly because this can cause conditions like Bertolletti syndrome, or it can cause where it can become a pain generator, where the L5 transverse process fuses with the iliac bone and can become it becomes there's more weight bearing on this, and that can become a pain generator as well. So we need this is the these are the main reasons, apart from the interventions. This is all this because this is a pain generator. Also, we need to know the exact disc levels. So again, what a normal disc is, it's a morphological normal without inclusive of degenerative, any developmental or adaptive changes. And then what is an aging disc? Yes, we've discussed that the nucleus pulposus has got type 2 collagen fibers to it, and proteoglycans, which gives the hydration to it, and which makes it the jelly-like substance to withstand the pressure. So, and in the aging disc, there is loss of this water content. There's loss of this the proteoglycans, and there's increase on this collagen. So, which makes it more harder and makes it more fragile. And coming to what a calcified disc is within the disc space. Whenever there is any calcification, when there is deposition of the calcium deposits within the disc space, it's called calcification of the calcified disc. And generally, this happens when there is a PIVD, when there's a prolapse of the disc, and when there's particularly a herniation with a chronic herniation with yeah, when there is a chronic herniation, it tends to get calcified. So this is one of the MRI that is showing a calcified disc here. So how do we identify it on the MRI? It's a very, very dark structure compared to the disc which is degenerated, or compared to the disc which is herniated out also. Oh, this appears to be more dark. It is more hypointense. So this is how we see it on a CT. The same thing, this is on an MRI. This is a T2 weighted MRI, and the same thing we see it on a CT. This hyper structures that we see, the white structures that we see, is a calcified disc. This is again migrated or a sequestered disc, which is showing, must be a chronically herniated disc, which is showing calcification. This is again a calcified tissue within the disc space. So now what is degeneration? Degeneration includes the changes in the disc. Okay, and one of it, the first one being the annular fissure. So what is an annular fissure? Here we can see a white structure here, a hyperintense zone here, or a hyperintense structure here. So we'll come to what is this. Is again a larger annular fissure that we can see here, again with a hyperintense zone to it. So yeah, so what is an annular fissure? So annular fissure is any so we've spoken about what an annulus fibrosis is. Okay, the outer covering of the nucleus pulposus, right, on the periphery. So so what is an annular fissure? Annular fissure, yeah, before we go on to what an annular fissure is, we've discussed that it's got type 1 collagen fibers which are lamellated, right? So when there is any delamination of these, or when there's loosening of any of these fibers, or either because of trauma or because of any degeneration, it leads to certain rents in that lamellated structure. So those rents result in fissures. Okay, so this fissures can be either radially, so it can be from say from the nucleus pulposus, it can come up till the periphery, and that is called a radial. That's how a radial fissure looks like. It can be a concentric fissure, which is all around the periphery. It takes the contour of the periphery here. This is an example of a concentric fissure, which is a separate, which is a rent or a dent in the periphery of the disc, like this. Okay, so and then what is a transverse fissure? It is more of a radial fissure, but it is in the transverse section. So what is the importance of this? Not much of importance. I mean, whether it is a radial or a concentric or a transverse fissure, it doesn't really show on the MRI. But then the importance of these, of knowing these, the types, is basically when it is a radial fissure, the chances of this nucleus pulposus to get displaced out and cause a herniation or an extrusion is basically a herniation is much more than a concentric fissure. So, but coming to a concentric fissure, it is more in the contour of this annulus fibrosis, and more than the disc getting herniated, it once there is a rent in this annulus fibrosis and a concentric fissure is formed, it gets filled with fluid, and this leads to more of a discogenic pain than a radicular pain. Okay, so that is the reason why that's the reason why we need to know these the types of fissures. And because the our management changes when it is just a discogenic pain with a concentric annular fissure, then our management like a bipuplasty would help. Whereas when there is a herniation, when there's a radial fissure and the disc material gets displaced out, and then our management would change where we might have to do a discectomy. Okay, so that's what a radial, a transverse, and a concentric fissure means. And yeah, and by delamination, we've already discussed it's the separation of the annular fibers along the planes which is parallel to the periphery of the disc. So what an annular gap is, it's more of a non-standard term. When this annular fissure when this annular fissures that we see, it takes a triangular shape in the annulus fibrosus. And it gets filled with, I mean, when there's a fissure and it gets kind of filled with fluid, and then we see it, when we see the shape more triangular in structure, then we call it an annular gap, which is no more used, and it's not a standard term. Um, uh, uh, so it is not something we need to remember or use it basically. So what an annular rupture is? So an annular rupture is whenever there is a violent injury, or whenever there's an injury to the disc, and then there is rupture causing rupture of these annular fibers. It is called an annular rupture, and it is not equal to what we've discussed it to be an annular fissure or a ruptured disc. An annular fissure is more of a degenerative change because of the long-standing pressure, or because of degeneration, because of the aging process. But when it is secondary to trauma, we call it an annular rupture and not a fissure, and it is not equal to what an annular fissure is. And then what is a high intensity zone? A high intensity zone, we've discussed here what an annular fissure is, and what the concentric fissure can do, what a radial fissure can do, can lead to. So when the annular fissure, the rent gets filled with, either the rent getting filled with the inflammatory exudates, or I mean, or when there is or when there's a granulation tissue which is formed around or close to this the fissure, either of it can represent a high intensity zone. So once again, I will repeat this because this is of lot of importance, and this actually is of a lot of interest in our OPDs when we see, and we know that this is the pain generator. When we see a high intensity zone on the MRI, we know where our pain generator is. And our management becomes much more easy. So a high intensity zone is a hyper intense zone which we see on the MRI, which is either the fissure that is caused, the rent that is caused, or it can also represent the granulation tissue which is formed around that rent. The tissue around that gets inflamed, and there's some adhesions, there is some fibrous tissue which grows there, and some that is the granulation tissue, and that can also appear to be white or hyper intense. So a HIZ, or a hyperintense zone, basically it denotes, or it notifies that there is a fissure there. So what is intraannular displacement? Intraannular displacement is the displacement of the nucleus pulposus from the nucleus of origin into the annulus fibrosus, but it limits itself to the annulus fibrosus, and it doesn't move outside the disc space. This is called an intraannular displacement. And now moving to what a discogram is. So discogram is basically a diagnostic procedure according to the present protocols. Before any intervention being done on a particular disc, or we think that this a particular disc to be the pathological disc, and before we perform any intervention, a discogram is to be done, wherein a dye is injected into the disc. This itself is a huge chapter again, where there are certain pressures the disc has when the patient is in a prone position and sitting position, or in a lying or in a bending sideways position. And based on those opening snap pressures, we see at what pressures we are able to enter the disc. So and we inject the dye there. And so we know what is a chemically sensitive disc, a mechanical disc, and the contact sensitive disc. And then once we inject the dye here, okay, once the dye is injected, we can see as to what is the kind of fissure, whether it is just an intra-annular displacement or it's out of the disc space, whether if the dye has spread across the out of the disc space and is entering into the epidural space. So based on the spread of the dye, we know as to how severe the fissure is. Yeah. So we have a classification called the Dallas classification, or the modified Dallas classification, which shows the degree of the annular fissuring. So this is the Dallas classification. So post the injection of the dye, we see the spread of the dye. So here in grade 0, which is a normal disc without any annular fissuring. So if when the dye is injected into, this is how the disc looks like. And here, this is how when there's a great one fissure, when the dye is just leaked into the inner 2/3 of the annulus, it is called inner 1/3 of the annulus, it's called grade 1. Inner 2/3 of the annulus, it's called grade 2. When the dye has is leaked all through the entire thickness of the annulus, it is grade 3. And when it is come through the entire thickness and also it is extending circumferentially, it is called grade 4. And then it is grade 5 when the dye is entering into the epidural space also. So this gives us, so once a discogram is done intraoperatively, in the OT, when we perform this discogram, it gives us an insight as to how what is the extent of the annular fissure. And it also gives us, it also helps us to prognose the condition post intervention as well. So this is the picture which was given in the diagram, the schematic diagram which was given in the article, which shows the different grades of the dye spread. So moving to what a herniation is. So herniation is localized or focal displacement of the disc material beyond the intervertebral disc space. So beyond, so this, if you can draw a normal disc here, okay. So beyond this, the disc space, if the disc material has herniated out, has moved out, or then it is called or displaced out, then it is called herniation. So it can either be localized or it is focal displacement of the disc material. So now there are different types of herniation, one being protrusion, one being the second being extrusion, and there's also another terminology called a bulging disc, and we'll look into what it is. So what is a protrusion? Protrusion is, so before we move to what a protrusion is, I would like to introduce two more terms to you, what an edge is and what a base is. So if we can draw an imaginary line, yeah, if we can draw an imaginary line from here to here, okay, so that becomes the base of the disc. And what is the edge of the disc? So if we draw a line from this from where the disc material has protruded, I mean, or displaced out, if you can draw a line here. So now we see that the base here, the imaginary line joining the two structures here, the base here is longer. This width is longer than the line joining, the imaginary line joining from this particular point from where it had started to displace out to the edge of the disc. So when this width is more than this width, then it is called a protrusion. Unlike an extrusion, where the base of the disc is smaller, the width at the base of the disc is smaller than the the distance between the base and the to where the disc has displaced out from its base. Okay, so this is an extrusion, and this is a protrusion. So what is a protruded disc? As the article says, it's the protrusion. It must be localized. It must be only 25%, less than 25% of the circumference of the disc. So the displacement of the disc tissue has to be less than 25% of the circumference of the disc. So this is all the same thing that we've just discussed. So we've understood what a base of the disc is, and again, what a disc of origin is, from where the point from where, or the place from where this disc material has extruded out. That is the nucleus of origin is similar to the disc of origin. And then what a bulging disc is. So we need to understand that protrusion and bulging, though they appear to be same, is not the same. So we'll see what a bulging disc is. So a bulging disc is when we've discussed that when the displacement is less than 25% of the circumference of the disc, it's called a protrusion. And when the when the circumference is more than 25%, when this displacement is more than, it is extending to more than 25% of the disk space, it is called a bulge. So why we need to know what a bulge is and what a protrusion is? Again, the management changes. So if this bulging disc is compressing the theca, or the traversing nerve root, or the traversing nerve root, then endoscopically we go and we do some by a technique called debulking. We remove the tissue from the center of the disc, so giving place for this bulge disc to fall back. So similarly, when there is a protrusion again, so when there is a protrusion and this is causing a compression, the technique of removing of doing discectomy changes. So that is why we need to know what a bulging disc is and what a protrusion is. And in bulging disc also, we have a symmetrical bulge where the entire circumference bulges, whereas in an asymmetrical bulge, one part of the disc bulges, leaving the other one intact. So this is what a bulging disc is. And then, yeah, this is how an asymmetrical bulge looks like. Yeah, this is how an asymmetrical bulge looks like, whereas this is a symmetrical bulge, whereas throughout the all around the periphery, there is a bulge of the disc. And then moving to what an extrusion is. Extrusion is when at least in one plane, any one distance between the edges of the disc material beyond the disc space is greater than the distance between the edges of the base. So that's the same that we have explained, that the width at the base is smaller than the distance or the width when we if we draw an imaginary line from the base to where the disc material has displaced out or extruded out. So yeah, so extrusion is important because this causes more compression on the traversing nerve root, or the theca displacing it to one side. It can also cause canal stenosis. So which not only leads to radicular pain, but then also radiculopathy, and it can also lead to cauda equina. So an extruded disc is very important to know and to understand. It can also cause it can also compress the ligamentum flavum, and sometimes it can also enter into the dura also, which is called intradural displacement, which we'll come across. So basically, an extrusion, once the disc has extruded out, it can there are chances that it can get migrated either cranially or caudally. Here we can see a caudal migration where the disc has migrated caudally. Similarly, this disc which is extruded can migrate cranially also. This becomes important it becomes very important to read the it is very important to read the MRI well, both in our sagittal, axial, and coronal sections, to know where exactly the disc is, not just whether it is central, paracentral, whether it is in the lateral recess, or whether, I mean, the subarticular or foraminal or extraforaminal, but it is also important to know this migration, if the disc has moved, migrated cranially or caudally, because when we are removing the disc, or when we are doing a discectomy, to plan up if any bone needs to be removed as well, to remove this fragment. So what is the technique that we need to follow? Whether sometimes we will have to go into the disc space, and then from there we'll have to try to remove this particular tail fragment. So that's when it becomes all the more important, and also to know that if this is the pain generator or not. Sometimes it can be a migrated disc, but yet not be painful when it is not compressing upon the traversing nerve roots. So it's important that way to know whether to understand what a migration is, and whether that is really the pain generator or not. So that's about a migrated disc. And now moving on to what a sequestered disc is. Any The extruded disc usually, I mean, when it is not in continuity with the parent disc, then it is called a sequestered disc. Like, say, example, yeah, this disc, which is no more in continuity with its parent disc. So it has no annulus fibrosis to it, or it is the posterior longitudinal ligament, which is also again a protective structure, which prevents the disc from being displaced when they so when they tear apart, or when they cause a discontinuity from the annulus fibrosis, or from the parent disc, then it is called a sequestered disc. So most of the times when this sequestered disc, when this get the when this fragment gets sequestered from its parent disc, lies between the disc spaces. It lies between posterior to the vertebra, the bone level, and then it becomes difficult to remove this disc, and there are high chances that most of the times, generally, a chronic herniation leads to such kind of sequestrations and migrations, and they can be calcified discs also. And these are the kind of discs that generally gets calcified, and it is difficult to remove such discs as endoscopically, and they can also cause a tear in the dura. So it is important to read on our MRI whether it is a calcified disc, and where the sequestration is, and what kind of migration it is. And generally, a cranial migration is more difficult to get the access to than a caudal migration. Then, what is a free fragment? Yes, the sequestered disc, when that part of the fragment which is no connected, that particular fragment is called a free fragment. So a free fragment is a fragment of the disc that has separated from the disc of origin, and it has no continuity of the disc tissue within the disc of origin. So this is a sequestered disc. This is how it looks on the sagittal section. So we've discussed what a migrated disc is. This is how it looks. This is a classical caudal migration. We can see an annular fissure here with migration of the disc. Then what are small nodes? These are herniated disc in the in the craniocaudate, either above or below into the vertebral end plates. So generally, when there are end plate changes, when there are small micro fractures at the end plates because of degeneration, this end plates undergo certain micro fractures, and they degenerate and give space space for this disc to displace into the vertebral body. So such nodes are called small nodes. And yeah, what is a contained herniation and what is an uncontained herniation? So contained herniation, we've discussed what displacement of the disc material is. So when this displaced disc material does not interrupt the annulus fibrosus, the outer annulus fibrosus, and when the outer annulus fibrosus is intact, then we can call it a contained herniation. Whereas in conditions like or where we've seen a migrated disc, or when we've seen a sequestered disc, which has no continuity with the where the annulus fibrosus or the posterior longitudinal ligament becomes interrupted, and it has no annulus fibrosus or posterior ligament to protect it anymore, then it is called a non-contained herniation. So why it is important to know these is because, again, our management changes, because when if it is a contained herniation and a hydrated disc, then we can and it is a small protrusion, then we can think of management modalities like using an doing an ozone nucleolysis, or we can go ahead with plasma coagulation. Whereas in an uncontained herniation, they have no role, and then we will have to think about other modalities like going for an endoscopic discectomy. So then what an intradural herniation is? Yes, we were discussing what it is. It's basically the material when it has penetrated the dura, but it has not entered into the spinal cord. So generally the displaced material, there are chances when it can enter or it can interrupt the theca surrounding the spinal cord. So in such cases, it's called an intradural herniation. So why we need to know this? Because as pain physicians, such cases it is always better to refer them to surgeons, because because in these cases there will definitely be the a dural tear where it needs to be repaired. And so in these intradural herniations, they enter into the dura, that is the intradural space, but they are extramedullary. So by extramedullary, it means they are out of the spinal cord. They do not enter into the spinal cord. So then moving to what is intravertebral herniation. So the disc gets displacement in which a portion of the disc projects into the vertebral end plate into the centrum of the vertebral body is called an intravertebral herniation. So yeah, this is again a small note. Then, yeah, moving to what is an acute and a chronic disc herniation is. So an acute disc herniation, it's mainly upon the duration, which is more recent in occurrence, and this here we see more of an inflammatory changes, and here our NSAIDs or our anti-inflammatory drugs work well, where the pain is still nociceptive. Whereas moving on to whereas in a chronic disc herniation, the duration is longer. We might see calcification. The pain is more neuropathic. There might be long-standing radicular pain, and then there might also be radiculopathy changes to it. Pain to it. And it is also important to know that there can be an acute on chronic herniation also. Sometimes we do see herniations which might be a chronically herniated disc, but on top of this and it might have got calcified also, and on top of this we might see an acute disc herniation again, which where the patient complains of sudden acute pain with more intensity or more severity. So then we need to know that there must be an acute herniation on top of a chronic herniation. So Then an acute disc herniation, it may regress spontaneously without any specific treatment, whereas in chronic disc herniation, it undergoes calcification, and there are also gaseous changes that might occur because by vacuum phenomenon, which we shall deal in further slides. So a prolapse disc, something which we commonly use, we say PIVD, prolapsed intervertebral disc. Now, whatever we spoke about, whether it is a protrusion, whether it's a herniation, whether it's an extrusion, whether it is sequestered or it is migrated, all this comes under a generalized term called the prolapse disc. So then moving on to more changes in degeneration, there can be desiccation. We've discussed that the nucleus pulposus has got type 2 collagen fibers to it. It's got more of proteoglycans, the water content to it. So when there is degeneration, and this is a normal disc which has got hyper intense structure in between the nucleus pulposus, whereas here, if you can see here, it is more hypo intense, which is showing the loss of the water content, and such kind of discs are called desiccated discs. So it is also called a dark disc on the MRI. On T2 weighted, we generally find them as a dark weighted, a dark disc. And then yeah, what is disc height? Disc height is the distance between the planes of the end plate of the vertebral bodies, cranially and caudally. So this if we can draw a line between this end plate and this end plate, this is the disc height. And what is a disc space? It is a space which is limited cranially and caudally by the end plates of the vertebra, and peripherally by the vertebral body ring apophysis. That is called a disc space. So this is again an MRI showing multiple degenerative changes where the disc height is decreased. There are they're all dark discs, and there are here transforaminal herniations also, and there is ligamentum hypertrophy also. So they're all this is how I mean a very degenerated aged disc looks like, or an MRI of the lumbar spine looks like. So this here, we see here a normal disc. Here we see HIZ area showing an annular fissure, and then we see that there is a protrusion here, and here there is an extrusion which is compressing the traversing nerve root, and it's also pushed the theca to one side. So yeah. So hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Continue, please.
Yes. So
Continue, please.
we're almost towards the end, so I'll wrap it up quickly.
No
So
worries.
here,
Explain.
yeah. So one of the other degenerations, one of the results of the degenerations is the mucinous degeneration of the annulus, and so where the disc becomes more, there is more increase in the fibrous tissue, and then yeah, this is one more important terminology, the intradiscal gas or the vacuum phenomenon that occurs because of the degeneration. There is no, now there is no, it does not receive any nutrition from the end plates, which actually happens by the way of diffusion. It doesn't happen here when it gets degenerated. And and because of and as a result of that, there is accumulation of nitrogen here because of the anaerobic metabolism, and whether it is on the CT, the MRI, or from the sorry, on the MRI and on fluoroscopy also, it looks more hyper intense, and this is of importance to the physician or the interventionist while doing a procedure, like say when there are modalities like nucleoplasty that we do for degenerative disc to decrease the pain. In such cases, when we see this accumulation of this nitrogen or the disc, what we do is we generally go and wash them out. When with saline, we can wash out this gas, and that also gives pain relief to the patient. So yeah, and then moving to what osteophytes are. Again, this is one of the this is again a result of the degeneration. Like we all know how typically the osteophytes what look in a knee when we see as a result of osteoarthritis. So similarly, even with in degeneration of the spine, also we see osteophytes. There are different osteophytes, like the marginal osteophytes. There are few claw osteophytes. There is a syndesmophyte. Okay. So as a result of degeneration, there are also cysts or cavities that we can see in the disc spaces again, which become which again become pain generators. And then yeah, then moving on to inflammatory change or changes in the end plates. So um, the degenerative changes that occur in the end plates can be classified into three different types: type 1, type 2, and type 3. So for this, we need to compare the T1 weighted and the T2 weighted images of the MRI spine. And when we find the dark structure, a hypointensity around the end plate in T1 and hyper intense around the end plate in T2, it is a result of edema, or when there is acute inflammation and there is edema around the end plate. That is how it looks. Fresh edema looks white on T2 and black on T1, and this signifies. This shows that there is some acute changes, inflammatory changes, edematous changes, and that is the type 1 change. Whereas when there is a subacute, or when it is going a little chronic, and we find some fatty changes, then we find both on T1 and T2. So both on T1 and T2, we find hyper intense zones, both around T1 and T2, both around the end plates. So such change is called type 2 modic change. Whereas in type 3, both in T1 and T2, there are hypo intense changes around the end plates, which suggests of chronic changes, and which is more of fibrotic changes. So yeah, this is how it looks on an MRI, which is T1 and T2, the type 1 modic changes that we were speaking about, the hypo intense structure and the hyper changes around the end plate here. And this is how it looks on T2. Both look white, or both look hyper in T1 and T2, suggesting fatty changes. Whereas in type 3, both look hypo intense, and and this indicates that it is more chronic changes. So the degrees of this degeneration, there are multiple classification to it. One we've already discussed about the modified Dallas classification, or based on the discogram that is done. This is again another classification. We've also discussed the modic classification. And here we have the Firman's classification, which shows basically the nucleus pulposus here has a uniform high signal. The disc has a uniform high signal. Whereas moving on to the severity of grading, the central horizontal line of low, it is low intense compared to the grade 1. And here we see the disc getting more darker. And here we can also find the disc height, which is reduced, and certain cavitations of the certain cysts that we can see in the disc space. So intervertebral osteochondrosis, we can see. Yeah, moving to what an inflammation is. Inflammation, they can be so when do we use this word inflammation or infection in our daily pain practice? When there can be inflammation of the disc as a result of discitis. Be it because of iatrogenic, or most common in India being tuberculosis. So when there is discitis, we find inflammatory and infective changes. So that's when we use inflammation. The second, it can also be there can also be an inflammatory response to spondyloarthropathies, like say ankylosing spondylitis or rheumatoid arthritis. In such changes also, in such cases also, we see inflammatory responses when they are in acute, which like in ankylosing spondylitis, initially we find inflammatory changes, then we find some, then as they move forward, then some sclerotic changes, and then we see fusions and things like that. Then coming to inflammatory spondylitis, um, again, this is when we see the end plate changes, where we see we've just discussed the three Modic type changes of the end plates. And it can also usually along associated with degenerative pathological changes in the disc. We call them we use generally this inflammatory, the word inflammation, secondary to the degenerative changes in the disc. So this is how a discitis looks on the MRI, and this is how it looks on the CT. Then we're almost towards the end of it. So we were just discussing what a central zone is, a subarticular zone is. So it's this central zone is at the level of the cord, and subarticular is at the level of the facet. So the zone at the level of the foramen is called foraminal zone, and the zone beyond that is called the extraforaminal zone. This again is of importance, where when there is a protrusion, whether any kind of herniation that more importantly, whether it is compressing upon the dura, the traversing nerve root, or the exiting nerve root. Based on this, our interventions change, or the placement of our needle changes, our approaches changes, and that is why it is important to know the location of the disc. The same thing is explained here. Here, yeah, we can see the subarticular, and then we can see a foramen. Again, this is also a subarticular with some amount of foraminal herniation as well. And yeah, this again, it is important whether it is at the pedicular level, or whether it's at the suprapedicular level, or whether it's the intrapedicular level, or the discal level. Yeah, so this is almost towards the end of the article, which mainly here there are four terminologies which are very important, which we generally get confused also. One, spondylosis, spondylitis, spondylolysis, and spondylolisthesis. So what is spondylitis? It is all the degenerative changes of the spine when those are generally the radiological changes. When we see degenerative changes in the radiological imaging, we call them spondylitis. Okay, so and what is spondylosis, spondylolysis? Spondylolysis is when there is a defect in the pars. When there's a pars defect, we call it spondylolysis. Whereas what is spondylolisthesis? When one vertebrae, when there is one vertebrae, when one vertebrae, um, um, I'm sorry.
Slides over.
Yeah, when one vertebrae slides over the other vertebrae, it is called spondylolisthesis. I'm sorry, I forgot to put the slide of that. So basically, why it is important again, that is a very a common condition that we keep seeing in the OPD, where that again it's a huge chapter by itself. There can be anterolisthesis, there can be retrolisthesis, and there can be a pseudo herniation because of the because of the sliding. There can be a pseudo herniation which is compressing upon. So in such conditions, when we are and that can also cause canal stenosis. So in those conditions, when we are suspecting a spondylolisthesis on the MRI, most of the times the MRI is taken in prone position. So we might not, because it is not a dynamic MRI that is taken, we might miss upon this listhesis. But when we have the slightest of doubt upon that, it's always good to take a flexion extension MRIs, see if there is any sliding of the vertebrae of the vertebral body one over the other, because that is a condition which needs surgical interventions like fixation and Yeah, when the height is decreased, they might have to fuse
Flexion
the
and
vertebra.
extension X-rays, Dr. Surjanya, not X-rays would be good enough to just see
Yeah,
the
X-ray.
bleeding.
Did I say MRI, ma'am? I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, it's a flexion extension X-rays. So with this, we come to the end of it. It's a very extensive one, so I had to cut down on so many other topics as well. We shall share the article in the group, so kindly go through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Surjanya. Actually, it's a very well done presentation, such a wide and just all terminologies, and you have made it really easy with the help of MRI pictures. So coming on to our next presenter,
Actually, can I add
Dr.
one?
Dipesh? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to add, because it is a marathon presentation by Dr. Surjanya.
Yes.
I think you really have done a
couldn't
very
help doing
nice
it.
job. So I think when this topic was decided by Dr. Achal, so I was thinking that how we'll present this article within this time frame. So and really this is very important, those who are sitting and listening, that because this has come through a very if you see the article history and all, it all started in 2001 when they come up to have a recommendation and like that. But after 2001, I think it is in 2014 that recommendation 2 has came. But still, if you come through, there is a consensus recently that in 2023, so whether you should go for a one more recommendation from that group or not. So if you go by that consensus, it has find that yes, it's time to, because by this time, the last decade, we have added so many things, and the MRI, the dynamicity of your pain generators, and also the imaging protocol. So basically, to standardize more and more the things, it has been it's on the discussion that there should be a third, or the recommendation 3, and that should include structured reporting template, basically SRT. That if you go to the article, it says about the structured reporting template. And one more recommendation by your backpack group, that is basically back pain consortium. So because all this started because the MRE has been done, and the pain, as a pain physician, we are sometimes very much dependent on the reporting. So there is two things, basically the sequence, what has been taken. So how to take the protocol, the sequence, and then the interpretation. So if the interpretation is not good, obviously your knowing the generator might be sometimes confusing. So that we all went through. So basically, again, I think we have covered up so much of thing, and now hope so more and more protocolized, or the protocolized MRI and then interpretation will be.
Yes, hopefully the new one which come up has MRI pictures as well, and they have like correlation according to the latest treatments available.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just quickly move on to our next presenter. It's a small presentation. It is like, they have like few cases they have done, just a prospective study for where they actually did the radio frequency treatment, this biacuplasty, for radicular pain. Usually we discuss it for the low back pain. And so I'll just invite Dr. Arvind. You can start your presentation, and then in the end, we'll discuss both the papers.
Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Arvind, currently doing my Pain and Palliative Medicine Fellowship in PMMC and Safdarjung Hospital. Today, I am going to present a journal which is about cooled radio frequency treatment for radicular pain related to lumbar disc herniation. And the moderators for this presentation are Dr. Anshu Sharma, Dr. Ashu Kumar Jain, and Dr. Anurag Agarwal. So low back pain and radicular pain are one of the major causes of disability. A systematic review of the global prevalence of low back pain reported a prevalence of about 11.9 plus or minus 2%. So the kind of pain which includes nociceptive pain, neuropathic pain, and nociplastic pain or non-specific pain. The lumbar disc herniation leads to chronic radicular pain, which are the different types of pain which we have seen. So the conventional therapies, European guidelines recommend non-pharmacological therapies based on the strong evidence, but often they fall short. Surgery, which includes discectomy, it has its own limitations and risks. Usually, it has shown better functional outcomes and pain scores in short term, but by 2 or 4 year follow-up, the statistical significance is lost. And in addition, it leads to adverse effects such as cauda equina syndrome, post-laminectomy syndrome, or progressive neurological deficit. Hence, intradiscal bioculoplasty by cooled radiofrequency treatment emerges as a minimally invasive alternative. So what is intradiscal bioculoplasty? It is a minimally invasive procedure for the treatment of the chronic low back pain caused by damaged spinal disc. It acts by a mechanism where the radiofrequency energy flows, creating a zone of heat that actually causes damages only to the nerve which causes the pain. So it simply denervates or destroys the pain by causing damage to the nerve which is present within the disc. The various conditions that are treated with intradiscal bioculoplasty includes discogenic pain, intervertebral disc degeneration, annular tears, and disc bulges. So the aim of the study is to evaluate the effectiveness and safety of cooled radiofrequency treatment intradiscal bioculoplasty in patients with chronic radicular pain from lumbar disc herniation after failed conservative treatment. So the methodology is a prospective crossover clinical trial. The inclusion criteria includes there should be a WAS score which is greater than or equal to 7. Moderate or severe Oswestry low back pain disability scale should be there. The herniation should be MRI confirmed, and apart from that, there should be failure with the conventional therapies like analgesics or physiotherapy, and the patient should consent for the procedure as well. So what is Oswestry low back pain disability scale? It includes 5 different components which assesses pain intensity. So whether there is any pain present during the personal care, whether there is any pain during lifting, walking, or sitting. Based on this, they are giving a score of up to 0 to 100. If there is a pain score between 0 to 10, then it is categorized as minimal. If it is between 20 to 40, it is categorized as moderate. If it is between 40 to 60, it is a severe. And if it is between 60 to 80, it is crippled. And if it is 80 to 100, then the patient is actually bedbound. So the intervention which is done is the cooled radiofrequency treatment. Initially, the patients were given physiotherapy, then they were followed up. So if the pain is not settled with physiotherapy, then the patients were posted for intradiscal bioculoplasty, which was done using Coolif radiofrequency electrodes. So the radiofrequency tip usually heats up to 60 degrees Celsius, and in the tissue, it reaches up to a temperature of about 80 degrees Celsius. The healthy tissues are not affected because through the precision cooling system, only the tip is heated and rest of the part remains cooled. So hence the healthy tissues are not affected. So it causes a target ablation with sensory motor safety protocol. So it is conducted under local anesthesia or partial sedation, and 24-hour post-procedure observation is essential. So now we will see about how the procedure is done. Initially, the skin and the deep tissues are infiltrated with local anesthetic, which is usually 1% lignocaine at the level where the disc herniation is present. Then fluoroscopy is done at 30 degrees, which helps us to identify the intradiscal space and the facet joints. With tunnel vision and suprabradicular approach, the working channel is inserted on the posterior 1/3 of the disc. So then discography is performed, then lumbar decompression is performed, followed by the neurotomy of the gray branches of the at the corresponding disc level is done. Within the intradiscal bipolar energy is given bilaterally till 80 degrees Celsius for a duration of 15 minutes after a motor and sensory safety protocol. The patient is observed post-procedure within the hospital for 24 hours and discharged after that the next morning with oral analgesic. The patient is constantly followed up because so that if the pain recurs, they can actively intervene with some other minimally invasive procedures or physiotherapy for timely rehabilitation. So here we can see the procedure. So initially in the first photograph, we are able to see the site is inserted with local anesthesia, followed by that with 30-degree fluoroscopy, we are identifying the exact disc level, followed by the diagnostic discography is performed. Then bilaterally, the radio frequency stimulators are inserted intradisc and radio frequency ablation is done. So now let's come on to the results. In the participants, there were totally about 74 participants were recruited for the study, which consisted of about 66% of female and roughly about 33% of the males with a mean age of about 49 years. And the comorbidities included type 2 diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and obesity or overweight. So the various levels of disc herniation include L3, L4, which is roughly about 13%, L4, L5, which is about 46%, and L5, L1, which is about 40%. So the moderate osmosis low back pain disability scale, there were about 72%, roughly 73% of the people had moderate score, and 27% of the people had about severe score, and 39% of the people presented with unilateral pain, while 61% of the people presented with bilateral pain. Post-surgery, the mean duration after which the patients presented with pain includes roughly about 11.83 months plus or minus 12.1 months, which had a wide range between like 3 years, 3 months to 5 years. But we don't have, among these 74 patients, we don't have the exact data how many patients had presented after post-surgery, which is not mentioned in the article. So, and 73% of the patients had non-opioid analgesics, and 10% of the participants were already on opioid analgesics, and roughly about 17% of the patients were on physiotherapy, and none of the patients have ever visited the pain physician before. So the mean follow-up duration for the study was about 2.4 months plus or minus 1.3 months, and the VAS score reduction, 79% of the patients had good improvement, and the Oswestry low back pain disability scale, roughly about 98.6% patients said that they had functional improvement with the procedure, and only one patient, he doesn't show any improvement with the procedure, but the thing to notice, he neither had any amount of worsening, and among all these patients there were no significant adverse effects which was related to the procedure. So here we are able to see the pain scores, which is represented with the help of the mean and interquartile range. So before the procedure, we are able to see the rough median was about 8, and with the conservative management, there was not much improvement in the pain scores. Post treatment, the rough median score was about like 1 to 2. So hence, the cooled radio frequency treatment, it is a safe and effective non-opioid based minimally invasive solution, and it avoids the complications which arises due to surgery, and it shows strong improvement in pain and functionality, and it can reduce the disc herniation free, and also it frees the compressed nerve roots. So the limitations of this study, it is a single center study, and it has a small sample size of 74, and the sampling was done based on convenient sampling. There was no blinding, there was no group allocation, and the follow-up duration was very short, which was about 2.4 months. So we didn't have the data of what happened to the patients beyond that. So hence the final take-home messages include: cooled radio frequency treatment is a promising technique for interventional pain management, and it is safe. It is an outpatient-based procedure with a quite lasting relief, and it expands the non-surgical toolkit for lumbar radiculopathy. Thank you.
Good, Dr. Arvind. So we have few questions from Dr. Alif. Dr. Sajanya, would you like to take those questions?
Yes, ma'am, I do. But before, I can take. I have one doubt on this, on the temperatures that Dr. Arvind had just spoken about. His sir has mentioned it to be 80 degrees for
Yes,
15 minutes.
this paper has a lot of flaws, so we'll come to it actually.
Okay.
So we'll
Yes, ma'am,
discuss
I
that.
do.
So they have asked disc height in lumbar, thoracic, and cervical. So I think it's not like cervical, it's 3 to 5. Thoracic, it keeps increasing 5 to 7, and it's lumbar, it's 7 to 10. Even L1 to L5, it keeps on increasing. So this is like an anatomical question, and its disc height is better measured at in X-rays rather than MRI. And as Dr. Sajanya explained, you should measure the disc height from the center rather than the periphery. Dr. Sajanya, there's a question: how can we differentiate inflammatory disc from Modic 1 degeneration? I think you explained it, but you might want to touch that
Yes,
again.
Modic degeneration, it is more about the inflammatory changes around the end plates rather than the disc, the nucleus pulposus or the annular fibrosis. It is more about the end plate changes that occur. When there are inflammatory changes of the end plates, then we call it a Modic vein degeneration. Whereas an inflammatory disc is when the disc material, the contents of the disc, like the nucleus pulposus or the annulus fibrosis, when they get get inflamed, secondary to like say an infection.
Yeah,
Most of
basically,
what
so
we get
inflammatory
from
disc is the disc
appendicitis,
pathology, and modic one degeneration is the end plate
end-plate pathology.
end plate problems. Yes.
Yes, yes.
And this, they're asking for time required. Actually, I think it depends person to person. Usually they say 1 to 2 years, but it could be earlier depending upon how fast the degeneration is happening in some.
Yeah, this is something that we cannot comment on because
Yes.
it depends upon the lifestyle,
Person to person.
yeah, and how long the pressure changes that are occurring, the mechanical changes, and yes, the if it is secondary to the age degeneration, that also again differs.
Absolutely. Devesh sir, your the scrutinization of the second paper, because it is it's not like a randomized, it's just a prospective, and they have like a lot of flaws in it. If you can point out their limitations.
Actually, see, obviously the blinding, everything is not there. And they have done a crossover trial, but I think exactly if you think that thing at how they have decided that how much time they will, well, first of all, that the VAS should be more than 7. And that is one criteria they have fixed. This is one thing. One more thing that the radicular pain, basically, the patient has radicular pain, so they have only given, that means the physiotherapy, and then that means they have not attempted any sort of suppose a TFSI or something sort of thing. I think
Yeah, they have not. They have just directly taken the patient to pooled RF. Whether, I mean, just 1 month of non-responding to physiotherapy, that was their only criteria. And the disc bulges, I think they have not taken like extrusion, protrusion. It was just the disc protrusion they have taken.
Yeah, I think there's the inclusion criteria, and the its methods is not so, everything has been not just
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but otherwise also patients who are not responding to 1 month shall not be the criteria, because patients who are taken for such procedures, 90% of such patients will respond spontaneously. They'll recover spontaneously even without any intervention. That's what all the books of chronic pain management say. So why do any intervention before 3 months of the pain onset?
No, I mean,
Exactly.
it's not like fixed 3 months. I know it's the bookish thing, but by the time patient comes to you, and patient will
But
not
that
come
is
to
the
you.
criteria.
Yeah.
No, ma'am, but the criteria is conservative management for at least 3 months.
Management, yes, because it may be
before
acute
that,
disc. It may be acute disc. As Dr.
90 to
Sujanya mentioned that it's
95%
more,
books.
yes, it's more
As per the books,
nociceptive
90
pain
to
after the,
95%, yes.
yes.
So patients taken before 3 months or patients taken at 1 month does not prove any efficacy of any intervention per se.
Yeah, they have
So
not
I would-
mentioned
I
for
would
how
like
long
to just-
patient had pain. They have just mentioned whenever he
They have
presents.
just taken that,
they
want to, that means it seems that they want to do this procedure within that time frame. And that crossover trial they have done, I don't think that how much time they want to give. Suppose in this cases or a herniated disc or whatever is there. And as I think Dr. Rohit also pointed out, that how much improvement you would think that obviously within that time frame, it may not be effective in that way.
Sir, and other thing also that the follow-up is only for 2.5 months. So if you take it
Exactly.
otherwise, it doesn't fit in the chronic pain criteria itself within 1 month and 2.5 months.
I could not
So
agree.
the criteria or criteria itself for taking up the patients is faulty in this case.
And they
So
have,
that means
they
you just
accepted that in limitations, but obviously
only thing that I found maybe a take home or take something, the information I got from the article is that somebody just doing a cooled RF or a bicuspoplasty in a herniated disc, and then he just told that he got good relief. That is a 3 month. So that might be the same, but at least the pain, that as they said, there is no any significant adverse effect. So did they mention any significant adverse in terms of what, basically the increase in pain
worsening
or
of pain? They said
damage?
that even if one patient they did not get the pain relief, but at least there was no worsening, no motor and sensory
I'm worried
deficit
about that.
that
Because
fail back
sometimes
like
if
you
you have
get
not
in
selected, the pain might increase. That is the thing. But I think that is one thing that I think that yes, they have, well, at least within 3 months, none of their patient had increased in pain. So I think otherwise it is very difficult to interpret on this, that it is a modality within that time.
Sir, but if taken into criteria, I have not published my results, but I do more than 15 to 18 cases of baculoplasty with hot radiofrequency ablation at 80 degrees. I've been doing it for approximately more than say 5 to 6 years. None of the patients they get side effects because you are as it is doing the sensory and motor part. You are checking it properly, so there is no component of neuropathy. If you have placed your needles intradiscal properly, plus in this case they have tried to ruin the virginity by putting the dye inside. There is no point of doing a discography
Exactly. Yes. That I am again same thing. So what is the point of doing a discography in this?
when you have the sensory and motor stimulation part with you. Why do discography and inject further drug into the dye, which is we consider as a virgin area? And I have never seen any side effect for any of my patients. So I have done more than 3,000 or more than that number of patients. There is no chance of side effects if you're placing the needle inside. And at 80 degrees, whatsoever you inside the disc, it is the negative atmosphere. So you are thinking of any gram-negative bacteria infection, which is very common. Up to 95% of patients who are getting discitis are with gram-negative. With 80% of 80 degrees of temperature, I don't think any bacteria is going to survive.
No, but are you telling about the biculoplasty or just simple RF needle?
Both, sir. Even in biaculoplasty, if you're placing biaculoplasty at 80 degrees, cooled or hot, temperature at 80 degree, gram-negative bacteria are not going to survive. Plus, there is no point of doing any discography when you are having the sensory and motor stimulation. So you can avoid neuropathy as well as the infection if you are using your proper aseptic precaution. That's what was my point here, sir.
Dr. Ashish, any comments or anything for paper 1 or 2? Or anyone who are doing these procedures, like Dr. Gulati has rightly presented, anyone would like to make any comments or add to the information?
I generally keep the temperature to 52 degrees centigrade.
52?
52 for 15 minutes. And in the process, I make sure that I keep checking on my peripheral discal temperatures, not exceeding the body temperatures, not crossing 35 to 37 degrees centigrade. So that I feel is the more important, something that we have to be careful about. And
Just
as far as discogram is concerned, I generally give a dye to see the spread of the dye, how the tear
This is also like controversial. And Dr. Ashu is left. I mean, he's doing a lot of biaculoplasty. He also mentioned not to inject dye in that area. He doesn't, because you are clearly seeing that you are in disc. So and it's not a vascular structure, so you're not scared that it might go into the vessel or anything.
One thing that I would like to add here, So
basically, what the information you are going to get by doing a discography? What exactly you want? You want to see your needle placement, or you want to see in which way you think that?
I would like to comment on this. See, generally, if the lesion, see the placement of the needle. Sometimes, if we want to see, ultimately, we are creating the lesion in the nucleus pulposus. We're not doing it in the annulus fibrosus. We're doing it in the nucleus pulposus. So sometimes when we see the fissure very close, I mean, towards the inner 1/3. Okay, with our dye spread, then the placement of my needle would generally be a little in the posterior part of the nucleus pulposus. So what I do is I go more lateral towards from the facet. I don't go just adjacent to the facet. I go a little more lateral to the facet and then try to go just below. I mean, just anterior to the facet and place my. I'm telling about the fluoroscopic image that we see. I try to do. Whereas if that is not the case, then I would just go lateral to the facet. Whatever we bring the facet, we bring it to the center of the screen. So I just go lateral and I put my needles. So,
Dr. Sajania, sorry to interrupt here, but when you have to examine where the fissure is and you have to decide about placing the needle, that is before injecting the dye, and that information is already available in the MRI. So once you have already placed the needle, how are you going to remove the needle after putting the dye if your placement is not right, and again inject the needle again? So you are going to make 2 or 3 pricks in the annular fissure?
Yeah, I also agree with Dr. Gulati here, because the location of the fissure has to be seen before you proceed with the
Those things are
baculoplasty.
available on MRI pictures itself, so you don't
Yeah,
have to wait for
So
the dye spread to see where is the where the fissure is.
I give my dye when I'm giving the local itself. We anesthetize the track, right? So that is when I give my
So, ma'am, you want to say you give the local anesthetic around the disc, and then you inject the dye inside with the same local needle.
No, I remove the local, I remove the needle, the 18 gauge needle that I put inside, the 20 gauge needle that I put inside, and then I put my cooled RF probes in.
So once you have injected the dye, then
I inject 1%
you use,
Hmm.
just a ma'am, let me understand the whole thing. While you have given the local with an 18 gauge hypodermic needle, after that you are injecting the cooled RF cannula inside the disc, and then you are giving the dye. Am I right, ma'am?
Not the hypodermic needle, sir. I use this the spinal needles.
Spinal needle for giving the local anesthetic up to the dye. You want to say you anesthetize the whole tract till the dye, from the skin to the annular fissure. Right, ma'am?
Yeah, I anesthetize the tract from the skin
The
to
tract to the annular fissure.
Yes.
And then you use a hypodermic cannula, use your cooled RF cannula to enter into the disc.
Yes.
That's what, ma'am, I am saying. And then after that, you have injected the dye to see how the spread of the dye is and where the fissure is.
Yes.
Right? But that information is already available on the MRI. Why do you need to see the dye spread for that? Discography used to be done to evaluate if that disc is the cause of the pain per se. That was the main purpose of the discography. If you want to see the fissure,
you can
that is already
learn from
available
here
on the
that
MRI.
you can do without injecting the dye and see, because that's not is usually recommended. Even discographies are, these days.
Again, I think
that is not even the indication. That is not even the indication for a discography.
One more thing, that's my one question is coming in mind, that do you do discography prior to planning for a baculoplasty? Rohit?
No,
Sir, I don't do. I don't do, sir. I see
that means
the
exactly the
pattern
same.
of the pain. I see the pattern of the pain, and depending on the
suppose the true disc involvement is there, how do you decide which fissure you are going to go, or you do both? Because the whole, obviously now the discography is not indicated because you are depending on the MRI picture. But if the disc, there is 2 levels, suppose initially you do the discography to rule out exactly same picture might be.
I get your idea, sir.
So if you are getting the MRI picture in the fissure, do you do the both, or the different setting might be?
Sir, if the fissure is there in the 2 discs, the region where it is causing the pain, because most of the time if there is a fissure, the bulge would not be so much. Usually, I'm not talking of all the cases, there would be discs which would be causing, but usually if there is a fissure in the disc, it will be causing only a mild pressure on the traversing nerve roots from that area. In that case, the clinical knowledge comes handy to decide which is the dermatome and which are the DTRs involved.
But
that gives me the criteria. Sir, I'm coming to your point. Whichever gives me the best benefit and give me the best diagnosis, we do that disc in the first primary sitting. And most of the times, I would not say 100%, but 85 to 90% patients, they get relieved with that particular disc and baculoplasty. If 2 discs are involved, we do explain it to the patient with a consent that there may be another sitting required, which we do after 3 to 4 weeks after putting the patient through physiotherapy. If the patient doesn't get relief after 4 weeks, then we do the next disc, which is looking like less of a reason.
Because that means again, that's the same thing, obviously, because if the 2 discs is maybe doubtful, then first you'll go for, and then subsequently, if pain goes, obviously that was the culprit. Otherwise, there is no need to go to the other one.
Because the main point is why increase the chances of any infection or any iatrogenic causes of pain that patient may later complain to us.
Yeah, because most of the time we find that band-like pain that is coming, that mostly that discogenic pain. It may not be corresponding to any specific dermatome. the pain is might be in that way. So
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. You are right on that, sir.
difficult to decide exactly. ठीक है.
Thank you, Dr.
Sir, I
Gulati.
have one doubt.
So I just want to know, so
Sir, I just,
Dr. Karthik, yes, please.
excuse me. Yeah, ma'am, actually, I want to know where to give the lesion, whether it's annulus fibrosis or nucleus fibrosis, because that nerves are present in the annulus fibrosis only, no?
Yes.
Madam told to give the lesion in the nucleus fibrosis. I have doubt on.
it is always the nucleus pulposus. We do not want to create a lesion in the annulus fibrosis. So if you're causing a lesion in the annular fibrosis, you're actually weakening up the disc all the more, and it will cause a herniation. And here the entire logic of causing the lesion is because by healing, it causes fibrosis, it causes retraction, and therefore the rent which is caused also retracts back. That's the whole idea of this. So we never cause a lesion in the annulus fibrosis. We never want to weaken up the fibers in the annulus fibrosis.
Okay,
So, ma'am, in your
Okay.
case, how much is the ideal distance if we see the proportion or percentage wise of the disc diameter or the disc AP diameter? How much is the distance you keep between the tip of the two needles in cooled RF, ma'am? Because I do hot RF, so mine is different from yours because cool RF gives a bigger lesion. So, what is the ideal distance between the tip of two needles that you plan, ma'am? Because I don't do cooled RF, so that's why my question, ma'am.
You can go up till the medial borders of the pedicles, sir.
do you measure it? Like it can be measured in the fluoroscopy, like distance between the two
I
needles.
don't measure it, ma'am.
Percentage wise, ma'am. Percentage wise of the AP, because we keep it in hot RF or in the conventional, we keep it as the 1/3 of the total disc AP diameter.
Dr. Ashu Jain would have been here. He usually measures the distance between the two needles, and if I remember correctly, it's like between 15 to 25 mm. That's what that's for the cooled RF. But
Yes,
we
ma'am,
can
because for
double
cooled
check.
RF,
Bipolar,
because
it's
for
making
cooled
the
RF,
bipolar.
that's the
Bipolar.
lesion that generally gets created also.
Because you're making a bipolar lesion in this case.
Bipolar lesion.
So
Yeah,
that's
it's around
I've
roughly
seen the-
around 25 to 30 mm is the lesion that gets created. Okay.
I think we picked up a really
I think
controversial and
as
updated
this is
topic.
one point I think you can discuss in the next, I think, because I think
Yes.
recently I was going through one paper that when they have started doing as somebody has asked regarding the nuclear fibrosis, annular fibrosis. I think one article I think recently I was coming up, they have done RF of annular fibrosis, that is annular RF. I'm not going to detail of that,
No,
but I think
no, there are reports. So
Yeah.
we can probably, in our next one of our next journal clubs, we can have this, comparative studies which have been done so far in bioacuplasty. So I would just like to, announce, I would like to thank Dr. Dipesh sir to join us as a faculty, and anyone who would in audience would want to present, like Dr. Sajanya messaged me, she wanted to be one of the presenters. So everyone is more than welcome to be a part of this journal club. They can, come and present the topic of their choice. It will give you a chance to study, present, and share knowledge with other people and get so many wise inputs from pain physician all over India. And I have already, shared the link for YouTube channel in the chat box, so you can join our YouTube. In 1 or 2 days, the recording of this will be available